What happens when a seemingly harmless encounter in a dimly lit park turns into a violent confrontation fueled by hate, only to be unexpectedly saved by an elderly man who reveals a hidden strength that defies all expectations? The streetlights hummed a discordant tune, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced and writhed with the night breeze. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter, the thin fabric offering little protection against the chill that seeped into the city's bones after dark. He quickened his pace, the rhythmic thud of his sneakers on the cracked pavement a counterpoint to the unsettling quiet of the deserted streets. He wasn't usually out this late, but a late shift at the diner had thrown his schedule off, leaving him walking home alone through the shadowed expanse of Elmwood Park. Elmwood Park, usually a haven of green tranquility during the day, transformed into a different beast under the cloak of night. The vibrant colors of the flower beds faded into indistinct blobs of darkness, the laughter of children replaced by the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. The park's winding paths, inviting during daylight hours, now seemed to twist and turn with malevolent intent, each bend promising an unseen threat. He tried to focus on the rhythm of his steps, a mantra to ward off the creeping unease that tightened its icy grip around his chest. He passed a cluster of ancient oak trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the inky sky. A sudden snap of a twig behind him made him jump, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spun around, his eyes straining to pierce the darkness, but found only the silent, watchful trees. His breath hitched in his throat, a mixture of fear and adrenaline. It was probably just a squirrel, he told himself, trying to rationalize the tremor in his hands. But the unease remained, a persistent shadow clinging to the edges of his consciousness. The air grew colder, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling his nostrils. He could hear the faint sounds of the city in the distance, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing car. But here, in the heart of the park, it was a different kind of silence, a silence pregnant with unspoken threats. He passed a bench, its metal frame gleaming faintly in the moonlight, and imagined someone lurking in the shadows beneath it, waiting for an unsuspecting victim. He tried to focus on the positive, the beauty of the night sky, the faint scent of honeysuckle clinging to the air. But the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, more menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, sent a jolt of fear through him. He was acutely aware of his vulnerability, a lone figure in a vast, empty space, a stark silhouette against the backdrop of the city's indifferent night. He was almost at the park's exit, a sliver of light visible through the trees, when he heard it, the sound of footsteps behind him, multiple footsteps approaching quickly. His heart leaped into his throat. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't alone anymore. The silence of the park had been broken, replaced by the ominous approach of something, or someone, that meant him harm. The rhythmic thud of his own sneakers now seemed to echo the heavy, deliberate steps that were gaining on him, closing the distance between him and whatever lurked in the darkness behind. He could feel the prickle of fear on his skin, a cold sweat forming on his brow. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not a friendly encounter. The night, once merely unsettling, had become a palpable threat, and he was trapped in its suffocating embrace. The footsteps stopped just behind him. Marcus could feel the heat of their breath on the back of his neck, a chilling proximity that sent a wave of icy dread through him. He didn't dare turn around, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but his legs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and disbelief. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't a random encounter. This was something far more sinister. Then, a voice, rough and gravelly, cut through the night's stillness. Well, look what we have here," it sneered, laced with a venomous contempt that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. "A little boy out for a stroll in the big city." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a testament to the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface of polite society. Marcus's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to run, to disappear, to erase himself from this horrifying encounter. but he knew that flight would only invite further aggression. He stood his ground, his body tense, his senses on high alert. More voices joined the first, a chorus of hate that surrounded him like a suffocating shroud. He could hear the shuffling of feet, the distinct sound of bodies shifting into position, encircling him. He was trapped. "What are you doing here, boy?" another voice barked, this one laced with a menacing threat. "This ain't your neighborhood. You know you don't belong here." Marcus remained silent, his silence a deliberate act of defiance against the torrent of hate that washed over him. He refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction, of a show of fear. He would not let them break him. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on his shoulder, a forceful grip that spun him around. He found himself facing a hulking figure, his face contorted in a sneer, his eyes burning with hatred. The man's breath reeked of alcohol and aggression. He was surrounded by three others, their faces obscured by shadows, but their menacing postures spoke volumes. "We told you to leave," the first man growled, his voice thick with menace. "This ain't your place. Get lost before you get hurt." He shoved Marcus hard, sending him stumbling backward. The others laughed, their laughter echoing through the park, a chilling symphony of hate. They continued to push and shove him, their taunts growing more vicious, their actions more aggressive. Each shove was a deliberate attempt to break his spirit, to reduce him to nothing more than a frightened animal. Marcus fought to maintain his composure, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew he was outnumbered, outmatched, but he refused to be intimidated. He would not let them win. He braced himself, his body coiled like a spring, ready to defend himself if necessary. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated by the hateful whispers and the sounds of their shifting bodies, closing in, their intentions clear. The night, once merely unsettling, had become a battleground, and Marcus was alone, facing a tide of hatred that threatened to engulf him. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging within him. He knew that escalating the situation would only make things worse. He had to find a way to de-escalate, to reason with these men, to find a path out of this dangerous confrontation. "Look," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I don't want any trouble. I was just walking home." His words were met with a burst of laughter, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the darkness. The men continued to circle him, their movements predatory, their intentions unmistakable. "Walking home?" One of them sneered. "You right? We all know what you were up to. Snooping around where you don't belong." Marcus tried again, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I live just over there," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the direction of his apartment building. "I just wanted to get home." His attempt at reason was met with another wave of insults, a barrage of racial slurs that stung like icy needles. He felt a surge of anger, a hot, burning rage that threatened to consume him, but he fought to suppress it, clinging to the fragile hope of a peaceful resolution. "You think we're stupid?" One of them growled, his face inches from Marcus's. "We know what you're doing. You're casing the place, looking for something to steal." Marcus shook his head, his patience wearing thin. "I'm not stealing anything. I just want to go home." "Then get lost," another man snarled, shoving him again, harder this time. Marcus stumbled, his hands instinctively reaching out to steady himself. He felt a sharp pain in his shoulder, the impact of the shove sending a jolt of pain through his arm. He tried one more time, his voice laced with desperation. "Please," he pleaded, "just let me go. I don't want any trouble." His plea was met with a chorus of jeers and laughter. The men closed in, their bodies pressing against him, their presence suffocating. He could feel the heat of their anger, the palpable thread of violence hanging heavy in the air. His attempts at de-escalation had failed. They weren't interested in reason. They were interested in violence, and Marcus was their target. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was not going to end peacefully. The fragile hope of a peaceful resolution shattered, replaced by the stark reality of a looming confrontation. He braced himself, his body tense, ready to face whatever came next. The night had turned into a fight for survival, and Marcus was alone, facing a tide of hatred that threatened to consume him. Just as Marcus braced himself for the inevitable violence, a voice cut through the air, sharp and unexpected. "Leave him alone," it commanded, the tone brooking no argument. The men froze, their movements abruptly halting, their attention diverted from Marcus to the source of the interruption. From the shadows of the nearby oak trees, a figure emerged, slowly, deliberately. It was an elderly black man, his gait unsteady, his steps marked by a pronounced limp. He leaned heavily on a walking cane, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the dim light. His face was etched with the lines of age and hardship, but his eyes, though clouded with years, held a spark of unwavering resolve. The contrast between the frail-looking elder and the burly young men was stark, almost comical. The attackers, momentarily stunned by the unexpected intervention, exchanged confused glances. They had clearly not anticipated this. "Who the hell are you?" one of them demanded, his voice laced with a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. The others echoed his question, their hostility palpable despite their momentary hesitation. The old man ignored their questions, his gaze fixed on them, unwavering and intense. "I said, leave him alone," he repeated, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested, carrying an authority that silenced the immediate taunts. His voice, though raspy with age, held a surprising strength, a quiet power that resonated in the tense silence that followed. The men, initially dismissive, began to shift uneasily. The old man's calm demeanor, his resolute stance, seemed to unsettle them. They were used to intimidating their victims, to overwhelming them with their numbers and aggression. This unexpected defiance, this unexpected resistance from such an unlikely source, threw them off balance. The leader of the group, the same man who had initially shoved Marcus, stepped forward, his face contorted in a sneer. "Mind your own business, old man," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "This ain't got nothing to do with you." The old man didn't flinch. He remained rooted to the spot, his gaze unwavering, his grip on his cane firm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threatening gestures. His power lay not in bravado, but in a quiet, unshakable resolve that radiated from him like an invisible force field. It was a power that commanded respect, a power that silenced the immediate threats. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of the old man's cane against the ground, a steady beat that seemed to underscore the growing unease among the attackers. The unexpected intervention had shifted the dynamics of the confrontation, introducing an element of uncertainty that had the attackers momentarily on the defensive. The night, still tense and threatening, had taken on a new, unpredictable dimension. The initial hesitation of the attackers quickly evaporated, replaced by a wave of renewed aggression, fueled by a mixture of frustration and contempt. They had been momentarily thrown off balance by the old man's unexpected intervention, but their inherent arrogance and ingrained sense of superiority quickly reasserted themselves. They saw the old man's frailty, his limp, his reliance on a cane, and dismissed him as a harmless, insignificant obstacle. Their initial unease gave way to a surge of renewed confidence, emboldened by their perception of his weakness. "You think you're tough, old man?" one of them sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can stop us?" The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the park, a mocking chorus that underscored their utter disregard for the elderly man. They circled him, their movements deliberate and menacing, their taunts growing increasingly vicious. They were no longer focused on Marcus. Their attention was now entirely on the old man. Their target shifted, their amusement piqued by the unexpected challenge. "Look at him," another one scoffed, pointing at Silas with a cruel laugh. "He can barely walk. He's probably got more aches and pains than he's got sense." Their words were laced with a casual cruelty, a casual racism that revealed the depth of their prejudice. They saw the old man not as a human being, but as a caricature, a symbol of weakness and vulnerability, ripe for ridicule and abuse. Their mockery was not merely an attempt to intimidate. It was an expression of their ingrained superiority, a reaffirmation of their belief in their own power and dominance. The taunts escalated, becoming more personal, more demeaning. They made fun of his limp, his age, his appearance, their words designed to humiliate and provoke. They were trying to break him, to diminish him, to reduce him to nothing more than a pathetic figure of fawn. They were testing him, probing for any sign of weakness, any hint of fear. Their confidence grew with each passing moment, their insults escalating in intensity, their movements growing more aggressive. They were pushing him, goading him, daring him to react, to defend himself. They were confident in their numbers, in their strength, in their perceived superiority. They were utterly unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface of the old man's calm exterior. The night, once punctuated by the sounds of their hateful taunts, was now thick with a palpable sense of impending violence. The unexpected intervention had backfired, transforming the confrontation into a far more dangerous game. The taunts reached a crescendo, a cacophony of hateful words and mocking laughter. One of the attackers, emboldened by the old man's apparent frailty and the success of their intimidation tactics, took a step forward. He was larger than the others, his build more muscular, his face twisted into a sneer of arrogant confidence. He was going to teach the old man a lesson, to show him who was in charge. "Let's see how tough you really are, old man," he growled, his voice thick with menace. He took another step closer, his intention clear. He was going to push the old man, to knock him to the ground, to humiliate him in front of his friends. He was going to show him his place. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't react. He remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the approaching attacker, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his hands, didn't make any threatening gestures. He simply stood there, a seemingly frail figure against the backdrop of the menacing young men, his silence more powerful than any words could have been. The attacker lunged, his hand raised to shove the old man. He was expecting resistance, perhaps a feeble attempt at self-defense, but nothing that would truly challenge him. He was confident in his strength, in his ability to overpower the old man with ease. He was wrong. As the attacker's hand reached Silas, something unexpected happened. With a surprising burst of speed, Silas dropped his cane, the polished wood hitting the ground with a sharp, unexpected thud. The movement was so swift, so unexpected, that it took the attacker completely by surprise. He had anticipated a slow, deliberate reaction, a feeble attempt at self-defense. He hadn't anticipated this. The change in Silas was instantaneous. His posture straightened, his body shifting from a position of apparent frailty to one of coiled energy. His previously stooped shoulders straightened, his back lengthening, his whole demeanor transforming from that of a frail old man to something far more powerful, far more dangerous. The limp that had marked his every step vanished, replaced by an agility and grace that belied his years. The attacker's hand, poised to strike, froze midair. His eyes widened in disbelief, his sneer replaced by a look of dawning horror. He had underestimated the old man, and now he was paying the price. The night, once filled with the sounds of hateful taunts, was suddenly silent. The only sound the sharp intake of breath from the stunned attacker. The unexpected display of strength and agility had silenced the attackers, their confidence shattered, their arrogance replaced by a growing sense of fear. The old man, once perceived as a harmless, insignificant obstacle, had suddenly become a formidable opponent, a force to be reckoned with. The night, once again, had taken on a new, unpredictable dimension. Before the attacker could react, Silas moved. It wasn't a slow, deliberate movement, but a blur of motion, a fluid sequence of precise, expertly executed karate moves. His years of training, hidden beneath the facade of a frail old man, were suddenly unleashed, a torrent of controlled power that left the attacker utterly defenseless. The first move was a lightning-fast block, deflecting the attacker's outstretched hand with a speed and precision that defied his apparent age. The attacker stumbled, his balance thrown off by the unexpected force. Before he could recover, Silas followed with a swift, precise strike, a perfectly executed Aikido technique that used the attacker's own momentum against him. The attacker's body twisted, his weight shifting uncontrollably as Silas expertly guided his movement. With a sharp, controlled twist, Silas sent the attacker sprawling to the ground, his body hitting the earth with a thud that echoed through the park. The attacker lay there, stunned, his breath knocked out of him, his arrogant confidence replaced by a look of utter disbelief. The other attackers watched in stunned silence, their initial mockery replaced by a look of dawning fear. They had underestimated the old man, and now they were witnessing the devastating consequences of their mistake. They had expected a frail, defenseless old man. Instead, they had encountered a master of martial arts, a seasoned warrior whose skills far exceeded their expectations. Silas didn't give them time to recover. He moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking, his movements a blur of controlled power. He was a whirlwind of motion, his strikes precise and efficient, each one perfectly aimed, each one designed to incapacitate without causing serious injury. One by one, he dispatched the remaining attackers, using their own aggression against them. He was a master of leverage, of balance, of timing. He used their momentum against them, turning their attacks into opportunities for counteroffensives. His movements were economical, efficient, and devastatingly effective. He didn't waste energy. He didn't rely on brute force. His power came from his skill, his precision, his mastery of the martial arts. The attackers, initially confident and aggressive, were reduced to whimpering, groaning figures on the ground, their bodies twisted and contorted, their initial arrogance replaced by a mixture of pain, fear, and utter humiliation. They had come to the park seeking to intimidate and harm, but they had encountered a force far greater than themselves, a force that had completely shattered their confidence and exposed their vulnerability. The night, once filled with the sounds of their hateful taunts, was now punctuated by their groans of pain and their whimpers of defeat. The unexpected display of skill and power had transformed the confrontation into a stunning victory for the old man, a victory that left the attackers utterly defeated and humiliated. Despite their initial shock and the swift takedown of their leader, the remaining attackers weren't ready to give up. Fueled by a potent cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and wounded pride, they scrambled to their feet, their initial arrogance replaced by a desperate, animalistic aggression. They lunged at Silas, a chaotic mass of flailing limbs and desperate attempts to overpower him. They were no longer trying to intimidate. They were trying to survive. Silas, however, remained calm, his movements fluid and controlled. He didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He met their chaotic assault with a cool, calculated defense, effortlessly using their momentum and aggression against them. He was a master of redirecting force, of turning their attacks into opportunities for counteroffensives. He moved like a dancer, his body a symphony of controlled power, his movements precise and economical. One attacker swung a wild punch, aiming for Silas's head. Silas effortlessly sidestepped the blow, using the attacker's momentum to spin him around and send him crashing into another attacker, taking both of them down in a tangle of limbs. Another attacker charged, attempting a tackle. Silas anticipated the move, stepping aside and using a swift, precise sweep to send the attacker sprawling onto the ground. He moved with a grace that belied his age, his body a weapon of surprising strength and agility. He didn't rely on brute force. He used technique, leverage, and timing to neutralize his opponents. His movements were a testament to years of dedicated training, a mastery of martial arts that had been honed to perfection. He was a master of his craft, a seasoned warrior whose skills far exceeded the expectations of his attackers. The attackers, despite their numbers and their desperate attempts, were no match for Silas's skill and experience. Each of their attacks was anticipated. Each of their attempts to overpower him was expertly countered. They were like children trying to wrestle a seasoned professional wrestler. Their aggression was futile. Their attempts to overpower him were childish and easily thwarted. Their initial attempts to overpower him devolved into a chaotic, desperate struggle. They flailed and lunged, their movements clumsy and ineffective. Silas, in contrast, remained calm and collected, his movements precise and controlled. He effortlessly deflected their blows, used their momentum against them, and sent them crashing to the ground, one by one. The sounds of their grunts, their groans, and their frustrated shouts filled the night air, a stark contrast to Silas's quiet, controlled movements. The night, once filled with the sounds of hateful taunts, was now a cacophony of pain and defeat. The attackers, initially confident and aggressive, were now reduced to a helpless mass of struggling bodies, their attempts to overpower Silas utterly futile. Their aggression had only served to highlight their own inadequacy, their own lack of skill. The old man, once perceived as weak and vulnerable, had proven himself to be a formidable opponent, a master of martial arts whose skills had utterly overwhelmed his attackers. The last attacker went down with a frustrated grunt, his body hitting the ground with a thud that marked the end of the confrontation. Silence descended upon the park, a heavy, pregnant silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the defeated men and the faint sounds of the city in the distance. The attackers lay scattered on the ground, a pathetic collection of bruised and humiliated figures, their initial arrogance replaced by a mixture of pain, fear, and utter shame. Their faces were contorted in expressions of defeat, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had come seeking to intimidate and harm, but they had been utterly and completely defeated. Their initial aggression, their hateful taunts, their attempts to overpower Silas, had all been met with a swift, decisive response. They had underestimated their opponent, and they had paid the price. Their bodies ached, their pride was shattered, and their sense of invincibility was utterly destroyed. They had come to the park seeking to assert their dominance, to express their hatred, but they had been humbled, exposed, and utterly defeated. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the defeated men, the rustling of leaves in the night breeze, and the distant sounds of the city. Then, slowly, one by one, the attackers began to stir. They pushed themselves up from the ground, their movements slow and painful, their bodies bearing the marks of their defeat. Their faces were a mixture of pain and shame, their eyes avoiding Silas's gaze. They were no longer the confident, aggressive young men who had approached Marcus just moments before. They were defeated, humiliated, and utterly ashamed. They didn't speak. They didn't offer any apologies. Their silence was a testament to their defeat, their humiliation, their utter lack of words. They knew they had been beaten, and they knew they had been beaten by someone they had grossly underestimated. They knew they had been wrong, and they knew they had been exposed. With slow, deliberate movements, they gathered themselves, their bodies aching, their pride shattered. They didn't look at Silas. They didn't look at Marcus. Their eyes were fixed on the ground, their faces contorted in expressions of shame and defeat. They were no longer the confident, aggressive young men who had approached Marcus just moments before. They were defeated, humiliated, and utterly ashamed. Without a word, without a backward glance, they turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the park. Their retreat was not a strategic maneuver. It was a desperate flight, a hurried escape from the scene of their humiliating defeat. They left Marcus and Silas alone in the quiet of the night, the silence punctuated only by the sounds of their retreating footsteps and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The night, once filled with the sounds of their hateful taunts, was now filled with the silence of their defeat, a silence that spoke volumes about their humiliation and their utter lack of power. The confrontation was over, and the victor stood alone in the quiet of the night. After the attackers had fled, a stunned silence hung in the air. Marcus stood there, speechless, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He looked at Silas, his eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. He had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied all expectations. He had seen an elderly man, seemingly frail and vulnerable, effortlessly defeat a group of aggressive young men, his movements precise, his skill breathtaking. It was a scene that would forever be etched in his memory, a testament to the power of hidden strength and unexpected resilience. He had been terrified, on the verge of being attacked, and then, out of the shadows, this seemingly frail old man had appeared, turning the tide of the confrontation with a display of skill and power that had left him speechless. He approached Silas, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done without you." Silas smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He looked at Marcus, his gaze warm and reassuring. "It was nothing," he said, his voice raspy but calm. "Just a little exercise." Marcus shook his head, unable to contain his amazement. "Exercise?" he exclaimed. "That was incredible. You moved like a ninja or something. I've never seen anything like it in my life." Silas chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to emanate from deep within his chest. "I've had a little training," he said, his eyes twinkling. "It's been a long time, though." Marcus continued to express his gratitude, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to express his appreciation. He couldn't believe what he had witnessed, the unexpected display of skill and bravery that had saved him from a potentially dangerous situation. He had been terrified, on the verge of being attacked. And then, out of the shadows, this seemingly frail old man had appeared, transforming the situation with a display of power and skill that left him speechless. He had saved him from a potentially dangerous situation, and he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and amazement. He looked at Silas, his eyes filled with admiration. He had never met anyone like him before, someone who could so effortlessly combine apparent frailty with such incredible strength and skill. He was a mystery, an enigma, a man who had revealed a hidden strength that had left Marcus utterly speechless. He felt a profound respect for Silas, a respect that went beyond mere gratitude. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had changed his perspective on strength, resilience, and the unexpected power that could be hidden beneath a seemingly ordinary exterior. The night, once filled with fear and uncertainty, was now filled with a sense of awe and profound gratitude. As Marcus continued to express his gratitude, Silas smiled, his eyes twinkling with a knowing amusement. He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that was surprisingly strong despite his apparent frailty. "You learned something tonight, young man," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Appearances can be deceiving." Marcus nodded, his mind still reeling from the events of the evening. He had learned a powerful lesson about appearances and the importance of inner strength. He had seen firsthand how a seemingly frail old man could possess incredible power and skill, how a quiet, unassuming exterior could mask a formidable inner strength. He had witnessed the power of hidden potential, the unexpected resilience of the human spirit. "Sometimes," Silas continued, his voice taking on a reflective tone, "the strongest people are the ones you least expect. The ones who look the weakest, the most vulnerable, often possess the greatest inner strength." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in memories. "I've learned that lesson many times in my life." He fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. The night air was cool, the silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city. Marcus waited patiently, sensing that Silas was about to share something significant, something personal. "I've lived a long life," Silas finally said, his voice low and thoughtful. "And I've seen a lot of things, things that would surprise you, things that would make you question everything you think you know." He looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with a depth of wisdom that transcended his years. "I've faced danger many times, and I've learned that true strength isn't about size or brawn. It's about spirit, about resilience, about the ability to never give up, no matter what." He leaned on his cane, his gaze distant, lost in memories. "I've traveled the world," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen things that most people only dream of. I've trained with masters, learned from the best. I've faced challenges that would break the average man." He paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "But I'm still here, aren't I?" He looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Never underestimate the power of your spirit, young man," he said, his voice firm. "Never let anyone tell you that you are less than you are. Never let fear or doubt control you. You have more strength inside you than you know." He offered Marcus a piece of wisdom that transcended the events of the night, a lesson about inner strength, resilience, and the importance of never giving up. It was a message that resonated deeply with Marcus, a message that would stay with him long after the night had ended. The night, once filled with fear and uncertainty, was now filled with a sense of hope, inspiration, and a newfound understanding of the power that resides within the human spirit. The shared moment had transcended the events of the evening, offering a message of hope, resilience, and the importance of inner strength. Silas paused, his gaze sweeping across the park, his eyes seeming to absorb the quiet stillness of the night. He picked up his cane, the polished wood gleaming faintly in the moonlight. As he did so, his posture shifted, his body subtly returning to its previous stooped position, the effortless grace and power of moments before seemingly receding. The limp returned to his gait, his movements once again marked by the familiar, almost imperceptible hesitation. The transformation was complete, the formidable warrior once again assuming the guise of a frail, elderly man. He looked at Marcus, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "It's getting late," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "You should get home." Marcus nodded, still awestruck by the events of the evening. He wanted to ask more questions, to learn more about Silas, about his past, about his incredible skills. But he knew that some things were better left unsaid, some mysteries better left unsolved. He respected Silas's silence, his enigmatic nature. "Thank you again," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I'll never forget this." Silas nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Remember what I told you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Appearances can be deceiving. Never underestimate the power within yourself." With that, Silas turned and began to walk away, his limp more pronounced now, his movements slower, his gait once again that of a frail, elderly man. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Marcus alone in the quiet of the park. Marcus watched him go, his mind filled with a mixture of gratitude, amazement, and a profound sense of mystery. He had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that had challenged his perceptions of strength, resilience, and hidden potential. He had met a man who had defied all expectations, a man who had revealed a hidden strength that had left him utterly awestruck. He stood there for a long time, reflecting on the events of the evening, the encounter with the racist gang, the unexpected intervention of Silas, the incredible display of skill and power, the wise words of advice, and the enigmatic parting. He realized that he had learned a valuable lesson about appearances, about inner strength, and about the unexpected potential that resides within each of us. As he walked home, the city lights seemed brighter, the night air felt clearer. He carried with him a newfound sense of confidence, a deeper understanding of his own inner strength, and a profound respect for the mysterious old man who had saved him from a potentially dangerous situation. The encounter had left an indelible mark on his soul, a reminder of the hidden potential that resides within us all, and the importance of never underestimating the power of the human spirit. The night had ended, but the impact of the encounter would remain, a testament to the power of hidden strength and the enduring mystery of the human spirit. The story of Silas, the enigmatic old man with hidden skills, would remain a mystery, a testament to the unexpected potential that lies hidden within the ordinary.